Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 10th of October 2023. Today we look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article will be regarding the Indian Ocean region and we'll also look at IORA. Then we'll take up Schedule 5. Then we'll take up the Kudumbashree Mission. Then we'll take up invasive alien species and with special focus to Vilayati, Kikar. Finally, we'll take a look at the Haifa Port. Let's start with the first article, and this pertains to your GS2, international relations. Now, what is the context? Is that Sri Lanka is going to take up the presidency of IORA. In this context, the Indian Ocean region becomes extremely pertinent. Why? Because we are aiming to create a blue economy. A blue economy which is funded by the oceans. Why? Because we are looking at degradation when it comes to land. And overall, the output that is coming from land is decreasing while the cost of input to land is increasing. And the best example that we can see this is in agriculture. And therefore, we need to move towards newer opportunities in accordance with Gunter Pauli. So blue economy is the next big opportunity for India to cash upon the ideas of $5 trillion economy. And we must appreciate that this Indian Ocean region is also responsible for 75% of the maritime trade of the world and more than 50% of the oil trade. That means this region will have a lot of choke points and strategic points like Bab al-Mandeb, Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, and naturally we must utilize this entire region. Why? Because we have more than 2 lakh kilometer, more than 2 million square kilometer of exclusive economic zone which is under the UNCLOS. And we can go for commercial activity as well as exploration activity as well as the target to achieve a blue economy in this region. And we are blessed to have a peninsula and a coastline which is more than 8,000 kilometers long. Now, what are the natural resources that we can get here? So, we are looking at debates of critical minerals. We are looking at the issues of rare earth minerals. And the solution comes in form of polymetallic nodules. Now, in our discussion, we have seen that 75% of world's cobalt is located in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, we need the same element for the same EV transition, for the battery transition, for the sustainable energy transition, and therefore, India will also require its fair share of critical minerals, rare earth minerals, and minerals like manganese, cobalt, copper, nickel, etc. So, polymetallic nodules in the exclusive economic zone. It's exploration and potentially it's commercial mining. We are exploring, but we have not started any commercial pursuit as of now. Then the idea of food security. Whether we are looking at flora or fauna. That means whether we are looking at plants based off sea. So let's say edible seaweeds. And when we are talking about fauna, I am essentially referring to the fishery sector, which can potentially give me 4.5 million metric tons of annual food. And what are we looking at? We are looking at an increasing population base. While simultaneously we are looking at gradually decreasing outputs or outcomes from the same piece of land. And simultaneously, we are also looking at the increasing cost of agriculture. This points out that we need to diversify our food to ensure our sustainable food security. And therefore, the oceans give us the opportunity of food security as well. Then, if we are looking at energy security. So, energy security does not mean that we are completely going away from carbon. Or we are only importing, we are only finding good importers. it is also about finding new sources of energy, and these gas hydrates and petroleum reserves which can be found in EEZ will offer the next leg of growth when it comes to energy sector. And naturally, transportation, logistics, when it comes to trade. So today India is targeting, let's say, $500 billion of trade. Tomorrow, when we are looking for $5 trillion, we might target $1 to $2 trillion of economy. States like Uttar Pradesh itself is targeting a $1 trillion economy. Companies like the Tata Consultancy Services, they are vying for $1 trillion valuation. So how will the next leg of growth happen? Without due transportation, logistics and trade. And naturally, if we want to trade, if we want to transport our goods, we need maritime security. We cannot play in areas of, let's say, piracy. If there is too many pirates, if the sea is bound of conflict, then trade cannot take place, prosperity cannot be achieved. And we must achieve economic prosperity while also ensuring the energy security. And the Indian Ocean gives us energy security potential. How? Because it also gives us the horizontal space. And this horizontal space, as we see, is in regions which are more tropical than India. So that means it also has the solar potential. And naturally, new forms of energy that we can get from the oceans. Now let's look at IORA. So it has been established in 1997 and it is an intergovernmental organization which fosters regional cooperation. Why? Because this region is interspersed with the Pacific Ocean. And to the west, we see the tumultuous area of West Asia. And if we zoom in, then what do we see? Let's say this is the Indian Ocean. So we have the Persian Gulf, we have the Red Sea, we have the route towards the Horn of Africa, and then we have the Indian Ocean region, and towards the east we have the pathway towards the Southeast Asia and East Asia and South China Sea through the Strait of Malacca. Now, each of these three sources is fraught with peril because of the constricted space in form of straits which can become choke points. Then towards the west also lies the Suez Canal route, and therefore India has placed itself geographically at the fulcrum of the global trade routes, and naturally we must ensure that this region, the Indian Ocean region, becomes a zone of peace, and therefore organizations like IORA will become extremely important. Then it comprises of 22 member states bordering the Indian Ocean, and it has 9 dialogue partners. Now, what is the idea? The idea is that we have to go for open regionalism. That means what? That we cannot form groups. We must not form groups. We must not exclude. Rather, if people are coming to us, we must include them and go for an open regional approach. That means even if we are getting partners from outside, we should not close door to them. But simultaneously, we'll try everything to demilitarize or to limit militarization. Now we know that there are multiple military bases in the Indian Ocean region. The best example is Diego Garcia of the US. So, if there are multiple bases already present, do we want to increase the number of bases in the region? Will it be good for India's own interest? And will India also not try to become the net security provider? And that is one of the ideas that India professes, that it wants to become the net security provider of this region. Simultaneously, it also wants to create a blue water navy. so that it can dominate this region and help the people in terms of the first responder whenever there is any disaster. So whether we are having a plant failure, a desalination plant is failing, or there is power crisis, or there is food crisis, there is inflation, we are helping our neighborhood and the Indian Ocean littoral countries and becoming the first responder to any kind of crisis. Now, simultaneously, we must also appreciate that India is facing a lot of issues from China, which is destabilizing this region, because whenever China is there, naturally the West will always be hedging its position. Now what do we see through the map? We see that China has involved itself in Maldives, it has involved in Hambantota, it has involved in Chittagong, then Myanmar, then we are looking at areas of Djibouti, we are looking at Sudan, we are looking at Tanzania. So all around, we are looking at an expanding footprint of China. And today itself in the newspaper, it said that China is progressing very fastly towards nuclear powered submarines, which can fire nuclear powered SLBMs. Now all these events points out to also our neighbor, which is part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which again is a bone of contention. Why? Because it passes through POK. But alternatively, if we see, then the port itself, it is trying to act as a counterweight to our Gujarat coastline and the Mumbai coastline. Now, all of that being said, India must also have done something. So, India's maritime initiatives includes disaster management. So, disaster management, why? Because of the sheer presence of Indian naval forces and the coastal guard, India has the might to help all the neighboring countries and the littoral island countries. Then anti-piracy operation, and this is the idea of becoming a blue water navy. Why? Because we are expanding our footprint towards the East Africa region. Then going for security and growth for all. That is the wisdom of India, not one belt, one road. So one belt, one road is vying to create a unilateral Chinese model of funding fraught with debt trap diplomacy and the checkbook diplomacy to stifle a country's political class by bribing them and making them default on payments, and then to finally acquiring strategic assets like ports. Then India has also adhered to international law when it comes to UNCLOS tribunals by abiding by all the dictums and all the decisions of UNCLOS. Then it has also created an international fusion center at Gurugram where it processes all the trading and maritime operation data. Why? Because there are reports that multiple trade-based consignments of China are also acting as listening posts all along this oil trade route and the Indian Ocean region. Let's look at the second article, and this pertains to Schedule 5, and this pertains to GS2 Indian Constitution as well as social justice. Now before we start, we must look at Article 244. 244.1 reads the provision of the fifth schedule. Fifth schedule of what? Of the Indian Constitution shall apply to administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes in any state other than AMTM. So all states except AMTM. On the other hand, if I look at 244.2, then it talks about sixth schedule and it talks about tribal areas. So to say so, we have a very simple definition that we can make from the constitution, that there are two areas where tribes are prominently governed. One is under 244.1, the other is under 244.2. One is a scheduled area and the other is a tribal area. So we call this as scheduled and tribal areas. Now the governance is that this is primarily in the northeastern region, and the states are Assam, Meghalaya, then we have Tripura, and we have Mizoram. Here we have 10 states, but the issue is these are mainland state. That means these are not in the northeastern region. So northeastern region, if there are tribes, they are governed under Schedule 6. For Schedule 5, that is for mainland India. Now, we have more than 705 tribal communities and the population is around 8.6%. Now, how do we define a scheduled area? So, whenever I am saying now scheduled, I am meaning Schedule 5. And we will take up Schedule 6 some other day. So, let's look at Schedule 5. So, 7.705 scheduled tribe communities and 8.6% of India's population. Now, how do we classify the Schedule 5 areas? Now, this is about the total population of scheduled tribes. Now, we are looking at the criteria to determine the Schedule 5. So, the Devbhar committee in 1960s, it laid down some principles and another principle was added at a later point of time by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. So, first is preponderance of what? Of tribal population in and around 50%. Now, this is also contentious. Why? Because in some areas, the population is not around 50%. Then, going for compactness and reasonable size. Now, the contention is that this is very subjective language. Then, third, underdeveloped nature of areas. Again, subjectivity in what sense? So, administratively, visible signs of disparity. Visible disparity. And how can we see this disparity? If we compare Mumbai with, let's say, Assam, the Assam plains or the Brahmaputra plains, then there will be visible difference in developmental parameters, and that is your disparity. Then marked disparity in economic standards, how the quality is different. The provision of government services is also at a lower pedestal. And lastly, a viable administrative entities such as district, block or taluk, so that governance can be delivered. Now, in this regard, we must appreciate that Schedule 5 areas, approximately they are 11.3% of total India's land. So, these scheduled areas will have some specific privileges or some specific defense. Now, let's understand how they are governed. So, firstly, the President of India will notify. He will notify that this particular, let's say, 2 districts of Jharkhand have been notified by the President that this is under Schedule 5. The moment he notifies, that means now the governance of this region becomes a special prerogative of the governor. Right? Then, the President can also increase this area with the consultation of governor. It is not concurrence, mind you. It is only consultation. Why? Because the governor may have some extra information that the President may seek. Then it can give directions to the governor in terms of some specific instructions for governance. Now, what the governor can do? So, there are multiple laws in India, multiple central laws, multiple state laws. Now, once notified, the governance is in hand of governor. So, the governor can now tell that what laws will be applicable in this area. So, he can repeal or amend such laws and modify these laws in accordance with the scheduled areas and the local situations. So, the governor will use the wisdom. Now, it is not mentioned whether this application of mind is a discretionary power in totality or it has to be done in consultation with the Council of Ministers. Furthermore, constitutionally speaking and legally speaking, there have been no mention of how to determine a scheduled area, and except for the Committee of the Government in 1960, we do not have any notions to say so. Then, the governor will have to submit an annual report to the President. Then, the governor can regulate activities like money lending, then regulate the allotment of land to scheduled tribes, prohibit or restrict the transfer of tribal land, because land alienation becomes a crucial issue. How? So, if we connect some issues that the tribes of India is facing, is that the tribal regions of India also happen to be the forested regions of India, and simultaneously they also happen to be the mineral regions of India. Now, because of poor governance as well as alienation over the period of time and some amount of brainwashing, the outcome has been left-wing extremism, which is a security threat, an internal security threat to India, which is called the Red Corridor, which is also going for its last breath as we speak. Now, what were we saying? That these regions will have some unique culture. It will have some unique language. It will have some connectivity with the forest, with the land, with the, let's say, water. There must be some culture, some language, some local deity. If we uproot, let's say, the tribes for some developmental project, are they not, does it not create a ripe ground for exploitation, for brainwashing them through some left-wing extremist ideologies? Naturally. And therefore, the idea of Schedule 5 is to give more autonomy. But if we compare the autonomy of Schedule 5, then it is far, far less than the autonomy that is granted under Schedule 6, which is only for the tribal regions of northeastern states, Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura. Then we have to create a tribal advisory council. This is a 20-membered body. But the issue is that we do not know what is the composition of this, the exact composition of the tribal advisory council. And what the tribal advisory council will do, it will advise to the governor on various issues which are of the welfare of the tribes. But whether or not the governor will heed to such advice is not mentioned. Then we must also look at the Bhuria committee. Now please appreciate that if we are saying Schedule 5, that means the governor is determining which laws are applicable. And so the Panchayati Raj laws or the local governance laws were not applicable until the Bhuria committee recommended the extension of Panchayati Raj, and it finally took shape in form of the PESA Act of 1996. And PESA we'll discuss some other day, but PESA basically empowered the Gram Sabha. It first created the Gram Sabha and it also empowered the Gram Sabha. Why? To take care of, let's say, minor minerals and to look at a minor forest produce, to look at the issue of land transfers. So what happens is that this has democratized more rights to the tribal community and their Gram Sabhas. So the extension of PESA has been another success when it comes to Schedule 5. Now it is very important that simultaneously we must understand that PESA is not applicable to Schedule 6 areas yet. Now, what are the issues? So today the issue is less power and autonomy. And when we are saying autonomy, the autonomy in concern with Schedule 6. Then what is the composition of Tribal Advisory Council? Will we heed to the council or not? Then what about the tribes who have been uprooted? Who have already been uprooted, who are living in cities, who are working as daily wage laborers? Then what about the discretionary powers? Whether those discretionary powers with the governor are to be used with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, or it is purely discretionary powers? And are there any timelines on which the governor will act and therefore these discretionary powers in themselves become an issue. Then what is the boundary condition between multiple acts? Let's say if there is conflict between Schedule 5 PESA and the Forest Right Act. And this has been the case. Why? Because Forest Right Act is also somewhere to delineate, to reduce the alienation. To reduce the alienation between the tribes and the state. So if there is more alienation, if we create more alienation, then what happens? More conflict. And if we bridge the gap, then what happens? More peace, more development, right? Now what is the way forward? That the officers in charge, they must have an attitudinal change and they must appreciate the local customs, the local language, the local scripts, the local foods, the festivity, and to use all of this to become a part of their society so that we can understand from first hand what are the issues. But this is very difficult. Then alternatively, what we can do? We can have a mix of local plus people from outside who can govern such regions. Why? Because we must appreciate the uniqueness of these regions. And this uniqueness has been clearly highlighted. Why? Because the constitution gave these regions some special treatment. Then going for more empowerment of Gram Sabha and going for the true democratic process, including the financial devolution. So even if I give you a lot of authority, and with all authority, we cannot do anything without the financial backing. And if all the Gram Sabhas, they are dependent on only, let's say, the whims of the executive or the legislature. Let's say whenever a particular political party wants to give money, then they get money. That should not be followed. Why? Because democratic decentralization, democratic devolution must also include the financial devolution at the grassroots level, while also going for capacity building, so that the laws which go for more empowerment of the Gram Sabha, they are followed not only in the letter but also in the spirit. Let's look at the third article, and this pertains to your GS2. And what is the context? Is that all the participants, that is 46 lakh participants of the Kudumbashree Mission, and they are all women, they will now go to school in the weekends. Why? Because there will be a bridge course between what they know and the digital economy. What skills they today require to improve in terms of the success of the mission. In this context, this Kudumbashree Mission becomes extremely pertinent. Why? Because it relates to self-help group, which is part of the GS2 syllabus. Now let's say I have the issues of poverty, I have the issues of hunger, I have the issues of rural distress, I have the issue of lack of earning members. Let's say the male member is only earning in a family and the wife is a homemaker and the children are dependent, and we have elderly population also. Then what happens? So naturally, if there is single source of income and there are multiple people who are dependent, so what happens is that there is higher chances of poverty. And if there is any issue in terms of failure of this single person who is getting the income, let's say the health deteriorates, then the economic condition of the entire family deteriorates. So we must vie for mixed income and simultaneously solve the issues of this perpetual hanging poverty. So what do? Let's take an example of a self-help group. So let's say 4 to 5 aunties, we have collected. We have asked them to meet, let's say at 11. After they do their household chores, they are free. Now they are together making, let's say, achar or papad, or let's say bidi, or let's say going for some bamboo bottles, or going for namkeen. Now we have seen such models, such working models, and naturally they will be earning some money, and this money they will be sharing amongst all the members like a cooperative, and this will give income to 5 such families. Naturally it will also lead to reduction of poverty, reduction of hunger, more information sharing. So all the ladies, they will be talking to each other, they will be sharing their own best practices, their experiences. Similarly, can we create such an informal association of like-minded and similarly situated people who can share some money also, or they can save some money. Let's say they create together a pool of money, and through this money they start running, let's say, an achar operation, or they start making papad which they sell in the local hut. So that is a example of SHG. Now as government, what I can do, let's say this is a 7-member SHG. So as government, can I give them some space? Can I incubate them in some place, some community center where there is fan, there is Wi-Fi, there is presence of QR code, there is some internet. So all those things. Then simultaneously, can I also tap into the regional rural banks or the PSBs, public sector banks, to give them some line of credit? Let's say to make the achar they want 1 lakh rupees. Now that I know that the SHG has worked together for 2 to 3 months, so without any collateral, can the banks lend to them? Naturally yes, because they have created a group. Now over the period of time, let's say they do well, so can I incubate them to make them into a SME, right? And as SME, can I provide them with some marketing facility again, and let's say some space again, space for manufacturing and space in terms of shelf space also. Let's say we create a self-help group of tribes and we pool that outcome or the output, and I sell it under tri-fed shops, and I market them during these large festivals, tribal festivals. So what happens? More empowerment, more money to the communities, and that is the precise model where some informal association is created by peer controlled groups who are situated in similar socio-economic backgrounds, and it is the idea of self-employment and poverty alleviation. Even if we are going for very small scale operations, even if we are going for, let's say, making daily tiffins also. Now what is the Kudumbashree Mission? Now here, this is a particular model of Kerala. Now what happens is that they have a 3-tiered structure. One is the neighborhood group, so 5-membered, then 7-membered, 9-membered, like that. So what happens is that the neighborhood group, they will start selecting the people in area development society, and ADS will select the member through voting. So what happens? More empowerment of people when they are selecting the next tier of people. So over the period of time, what will happen? These neighborhood groups, they will get some amount of bank funding also. So they have created very good successful stories. For example, creating canteens. Then going for, let's say, masala shops. Then going for tailoring business. Then going for, let's say, bag manufacturing. for school children, uniform manufacturing for school children, for children of government schools. And parallelly what they do is that while they are alleviating the poverty, they are also checking on the work of the local self-governance. That is, they are checking the Panchayati Raj institutes. So usually what do we have? We have a structure in India where there is a center, then we have the multiple states, and individual states will then have their own structure. So over the period of time, what happens? That this is a single structure which is going for local governance. What if I create an alternate model where some part of election is also there? So the neighborhood group will be comprising of whom? The women, the local women. Then they are working to elect the members of area development society. So naturally there is more democracy. Now let's say there is some allocation of fund with the local self-government. And if I have created these two bodies, they will check and balance each other. And therefore we have seen that the Kudumbashree Mission, it will bring out a lot of issues of local self-government, and it will improvise upon whatever funds that are allocated to local self-government. Then its significance is that it is the largest SHG network in Kerala. It empowers women, generates employment, and eliminates absolute poverty. And such social structures are also important to bring about social changes. So example of social change, best example is going for, let's say, the open defecation. The fight against open defecation was about social change. So if we want some change harbors or we want some change agents, what better to use a pan-state SHG network like Kudumbashree? So it also creates employment for women, and therefore it is the best case study of women empowerment, poverty alleviation, social development, decentralized development, as well as an issue of local governance. Now the National Security Guard, the NSG, they have got their campus on the Aravalli Hills, and the Aravalli Hills is facing the issue of an invasive alien species named Vilayati Kikar, and the NSG has waged a war against this invasive alien species. Now let's understand what are these invasive alien species. So a species can be alien and it can be domestic. So let's say some plant is from India, and it can be alien if, let's say, it is from Australia. Now, simultaneously, a plant species can also be, let's say, invasive and non-invasive. So if it is invasive, that means it is acquiring more space than provided. And what kind of space are we talking about? We are talking about ecosystem space. So let's say I give 1 square meter size of space, but a species is expanding from 1 to, let's say, 100. Then I didn't ask this species to expand such faster at such pace. So this is invasion of my space. So if a species is both invasive and it is alien, then it is invasive alien species. Now why they are dangerous? Because they pose a threat to the local ecosystem. Example, eucalyptus, which was planted for social forestry, for agroforestry. Now it has become the biggest source of water table degradation. All along the road, we will see that in the 1970s they were planted, and all along the roads now we will see, mostly in the western Uttar Pradesh, that we have too much of eucalyptus, and along the foothill of Himalayas, too many eucalyptus trees which are sucking out the moisture from the soil, and they grow very fast. Why they were chosen? Because they grow very fast and they grow taller. Now, plants, animals, pathogens and other organisms that are non-native to an ecosystem and may cause economic or environmental harm or adversely affect human health, and they regenerate at an alarming speed. Now, if the local ecosystem is affected, then naturally all the flows, whether we are talking about flora, we are talking about fauna, we are talking about energy transfers, we are talking about flows of water, soil, etc. All of the individual components will naturally be affected if I bring newer species in an ecosystem. Now in India, there are some important species which are invasive alien species, and this can come as prelim pointer. So kindly note down the name or remember the name. So African apple snail, papaya mealy bug, cotton mealy bug, then Amazon sailfin catfish, then grass paspalum dichium in Kyoladeo, Ghana. Where is this? In Odisha. Then water hyacinthia in Kalinji wetlands. So invasive species, if we see anywhere in the news, it can become a very good prelim pointer and a prelim question. Let's look at the Haifa Port, and the context is that due to the latest wave of intifada, the port of Israel, Haifa Port, can be affected. Now why this becomes important for us? Because of two reasons. A, its strategic location in the Mediterranean Sea, and B, an Indian conglomerate, that is the Adani Group, having interest in the Haifa Port. And if Indian conglomerates are expanding so well towards global ports, what do we see? Is it an example of private sector also collaborating in India's push for blue economy? And a counter narrative to the string of pearls. So whenever we are looking at China controlling the ports of other countries directly, can we also say that Government of India along with the private sector, if they also have some majority stakes in alternative ports, then it is a counter to China's string of pearls. Then it also points out to India's growing significance in terms of trade, and that to Mediterranean trade. Why would an Indian conglomerate have interest in such regions? Having multiple supply chains going directly from India. So trade and India's growing size. Now, something about this port is that this is second largest for Israel in terms of shipping containers, and it is largest for tourist cruise ships. And if Indian conglomerates, they have interest in such ports, then what happens? Naturally, trade for us becomes cheaper and we become part of the global supply chains. Then it is a very important hub for the Mediterranean Sea and part of the busy Suez Canal shipping route. And it is a natural deep water harbor which is crucially very important for deep water ships. And these ships are essentially navigating through the global supply chains. Then the facility features 2 container terminals and 2 multi-cargo terminals. And this port is facing some heat. Why? Because of the recent attacks from the Gaza Strip towards Israel and the counter reaction coming from Israel. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.